You know, in my lifetime, the cattle business has always been a struggle, but I think as a producer and as a livestock auction operator, I think the things that you need to know and the tools that are available to you are very important in this business to add value to those cattle wherever it's needed or wherever it works within your operation. And you know, when it's value-added sales such as we're having today, you know, I think you'll see that it actually pays to use those tools to add value to your operation. Welcome to Maverick-Minute.
Today's student shout out goes out to Hunter Wheeler and Jessica Wheeler. Hunter has jump-started his career with an apprenticeship, and Jessica at home is helping manage the family's garden. They've got around 120 plants in this thing. 50 of those alone are tomato plants. And I know they get out early in the day and they tend that garden, and they're utilizing that for their family's use, but also they're selling at local farmers markets. Ashgrove people look for that at the Ashgrove Farmers Market when it does begin. Today we're at Joplin Regional Stockyards checking out the value-added sale. Join us and let's take a look and listen to some special guest speakers today.
Well, Joplin Stockyards has been in business a long, long time, since the early 30s, you know, over in Joplin when it was downtown. You know, I went there in 1977 when I graduated from high school, and in 1986 we bought the yards there, and in 1995 we built this facility here at exit 22 on I-44. In that time, when I went to Joplin in 1977, we sell about 70,000 cattle a year. Today, we'll sell 450,000 cattle a year. You know, we're one of the largest livestock auctions in the United States, the biggest in the state of Missouri. And you know, with revenue in gross sales, it'd be up there about $360 to $400 million a year in livestock sales, which is a lot of money and a big, big part of Southwest Missouri's economy, if you want to put it in perspective. You know, first thing, you got your producer, you got your cow-calf guy, you know. So, you know, he raises a calf and he raises him up to whatever weight that he can get him to, you know. From most of those calves will come in here weighing 400 to 600 pounds right off those cows. And then a lot of those calves stay within our trade territory. You know, we sell cattle here from several states, but you know, our basic trade area is within a 150-mile radius of Joplin, Missouri, and you know, there's more cows in the 150-mile radius of Joplin, Missouri than anywhere else in the world. So, you know, if those calves come here, then we sell them to a lot of backgrounders that buy those calves, especially the unweaned ones. They'll go to a backgrounder here locally, or go to mostly Kansas or Oklahoma or Nebraska to a backgrounder. They'll take those cattle from 400, 500, 600 pounds up to 700, 800, 900 pounds, and usually they'll market those cattle, a lot of them, back through here on our video auction or through the ring, and or they may retain ownership of them and feed them themselves and go to a feed yard. You know, then once they get in the feed yard, you know, those cattle are typically left there for this day and time, 180 to 220, 30 days, just depending on the size cattle they are when they go there. And then, you know, then they're sold to the packer, and the packer will take those cattle and sell them to the retailer, and then the retailer sells them to the consumer. So, you know, it's a big chain. It's a lot of events happen, a lot of things happen to those cattle through their lives. You know, everybody thinks that, you know, we just go from the cow-calf guy straight to the consumer to the packer, but that's not the way it works. You know, we might sell some calves here weighing 400 pounds, and somebody runs them, they weigh 650. Another guy in our trade territory will buy them weighing 650 and sell them weighing 850 or 9. And, you know, that's just, there's a lot of different ways to handle these cattle, and a lot of different ways they are handled. And you know, there's a lot of people that's got different perspectives on how they should do it, and the way they do things, and the way cattle change hands. I might sell the same cattle 3 or 4 times before they ever end up at the feed yard. You know, because that's just the way the industry works. There's so many different people and so many different ways it's got different niches and different ways to make money with them, that, you know, everybody's doing something different. That's what makes this industry what it is, and it makes it a lot of fun. Well, you take, you know, we'll sell a calf here weighs 500 pounds, which is pretty common weight, you know, and then he'll go to a backgrounder. He'll usually take that steer till he weighs 800 pounds. From there, he goes to the feed yards, and he'll typically, in this day and time, make those cattle weigh 1,450 to 1,600 pounds before they're actually slaughtered. You know, the genetics of these cattle got really good, so we, those cattle get big, and then from that weight they go, we had a lot of carcasses. I think the average carcass weight this week's probably 900 and some pounds, at slaughter. That's after they're slaughtered, they still weigh 900. If you take a 1,600 pound steer, address a 1,000 pound carcass. So that's kind of the typical way it works.
Very basic. Fat cattle, fed cattle, and live cattle are the same things. So those are finished cattle ready for harvest. We call them fat. Some people think that's a derogatory term, but people like fat, whether they want to admit it or not, or whether they know it or not. When I worked with USDA, we used to have people come in and call the office or they wanted to talk about beef, and they said, well, we like to try to get the prime beef because we don't like all that fat. That's exactly the opposite. So you talk about your beef grades: prime, choice, select, standard, commercial. You go down through there, the fattest is the best and the most marbling. And the only way you can cram more marbling into that steak is by feeding them, overfeeding them overeating, and light muscle helps that too. So a lot of people think they really want a lot of muscle on their cattle, which makes them grade a higher feeder cattle grade. It might make them a lower yield grade or a more positive yield grade, but it's going to be harder for those cattle to marble and harder for them to be a high quality grade. Feeder cattle, okay, so we talked about live, fed, or fat cattle, or slaughter cattle. Now feeder cattle are those cattle that are in the process of getting to the market. So to me, your feeder cattle includes stocker cattle. So stocker cattle is just what it is. You're stocking pastures with it. Those are grazing type cattle. Stocker calves, they talk about them. Some people that are a little more advanced will talk about stocker yearlings. Those are cattle that are in a thin flesh condition that can put a lot of compensatory gain is a big term that I use a lot. And compensatory gain is like a hitchhiker that's been out on the interstates working and hadn't had a whole lot to eat, and he's not completely but a little bit emaciated. He's used up most of his stored flesh for energy, and same thing with cattle. Those cattle are just they're ready to put on weight, and whenever you give them adequate nutrition, they will put that weight on at a faster rate than an animal that's in a typical flesh condition. And that easy weight that you get right on the get-go is called compensatory gain. And so those are your stocker type yearling cattle. Those would be a calf weight yearling. So they would be cattle that are, and being a yearling doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be chronologically at least a year old. It has a lot to do with their history, where they've been kept, how long they stayed on the cow. I mean, you've got a lot of calves that come off the cow that are relatively lightweight, and some guys keep calves on the cow until they weigh 800 pounds. So you're going to have it has a lot to do with where their background and where they came from as to whether they're a true yearling. But you can see an animal that can't remember what his mom looked like, been roughing it kind of on its own, can be a yearling long before chronologically a year. It's going to have that age-year look, kind of a split to the switch in his tail, and just have a more rugged age-year type look, and that's a good thing. That's what we want.
I just think it's a tool. Much as we started out, it's a tool to use. And I think as a livestock marketer, and I've always felt this way about it. I want you to know about the tools that are out there to use to add some value to those cattle if you want to use them. If you don't want to use them, that's okay with me, but I just think everybody needs to be aware of what the tools are out there to add value, whether it be genetics, whether it be health, whether it be whatever it is. You need to know what your tools are, and you need to be aware of what's around you, and you need to know that what cattle fit what market and when they're going to be fat, when they're going to make good yearlings. You need to be aware of a lot of surroundings. We're all very good at taking care of our animals and getting them healthy, but a lot of times we're not very good at the other parts of it, which is the marketing part of it. You need to be in touch with your livestock marketer and get an idea of what's going on within the market, when the markets trend higher, when they trend lower, and that's a big deal. And I think that within the cattle industry, especially at the producer level, a lot of times we don't pay near enough attention to that.
Well, there are a lot of attributes to cattle that have value, and some of them are reducing costs, and some of them are adding premium. And so it's kind of hard sometimes, based on the changes in the market, to determine which one happened. Did I avoid a discount, or did I participate in a market premium? And it just depends on how the supply and demand system works. But what we found with the VAC 45 preconditioning program is that you get cattle bunk trained, you get them immunized correctly, and so you're guaranteeing that they've got some kind of long-term immunity. And then we're documenting those processes to make sure that the buyers of those cattle have some assurance that those things have been done and that they will create value. We also have a nutrition component in ours because it's a very, very important factor in developing immunity. You can give a vaccination, but if they're not getting the nutrition level that they need, then their gut health isn't participating in that process, then it doesn't build the long-term immunity. So we do that to draw attention to them and to get feeders, and we've been at it 20 years, so they trust our tag and they trust the process. But in that process, even if you don't talk about premiums, you got cattle that will shrink half or more than half less than they do if they've not been preconditioned, because they're not balling and they're not walking the pens and they're not having separation anxiety from their mama. So we reduce shrink. We try to get an average level of fill and flesh on those cattle so we don't overfill them. But when I first started, there was an awful lot of cattle that sold that were really thin and really green, and there was a lot of interest in those cattle. But as people started getting these preconditioned cattle, they found out, those green cattle get sick a lot more than these preconditioned cattle do. So there's a trade-off there on how green they are versus what their long-term health will be. So there's a lot of advantages to the industry, not just to the producer, but to the industry. And then finally, the value that we add is that we document that, put a permanent ID tag in those cattle, and that information is available to people that buy those cattle. So it's not just going through the motion, and it's not just doing the work. You also have to have a third party take responsibility for documenting the fact that it got done.
It's come a long way in the last 20 or 30 years. When they first started these programs, everybody always joked and they said, well, there's no premiums in the cattle market, there's just discounts, and how big and how much. But that's not true anymore on these feeder cattle programs. There's places where the NHTC, non-hormone treated cattle, is a big deal, and that's pretty easy to do, just don't implant them. And so that's a good deal. And it may very well be that your guy that's going to put them in the feed yard, he just wants to give them their first implant. And these drug companies continue to tell us, they say, well, it doesn't make any difference. They could have had implants as a calf, as a yearling, and still it's going to give them a boost. And I've seen the data too, but you can't argue with the guy that's bidding and writing a check for them. A lot of them like to give them their first implant in the feed yard, and they think there's more compensatory gain there. And so even if that's the added value, that's fine. Let them do what they want to do. A lot of your commercial feed yards have a hard time maintaining these programs as they take them through the feed yard, keeping them separate and keeping the paperwork on them. But there's a lot of these bigger outfits that may have set aside one facility, maybe a smaller feeding operation that they have, just to keep some of these program cattle separate. But there's no doubt, and especially if you get a long string of cattle, guys got several cattle and they've been together for a long time, they've never had an implant, and then if you want to go further than that and keep them all natural, which, all natural sounds pretty fancy, but all that is you just don't give them any antibiotics. So if you have a sick calf, you have to sort it out and keep it separate. But an all-natural calf, unweaned calf, is nothing. How hard is that? You keep them all natural. You don't ever give them their shots and all that kind of thing. But if you've got a long-time weaned calf, or especially a yearling that's all natural, of course, no implants, no antibiotics, Now you're starting to talk about some pretty serious premiums. And then if you get third-party verification on some of these programs, then you're really getting into some higher money. And a lot of guys are nervous about these third-party verifications. They're not that big a deal. Just let the guys come out to your place. As long as you're not starving cattle, abusing cattle, or using a lot of practices that aren't supported, you're going to be fine. Yeah, it's a kind of a pain keeping track of your tags and all that kind of thing. But if you've got decent calving books, keep decent record books, it's not that big a deal. And there's some significant premiums out there, especially depending on where you market the cattle.
It's price discovery. We got to have price discovery so we know what they're going to bring. So there's no better way than put them in front of the general public and let those people bid on them and fight over them within the ring and sit on the seats and bid on them. That's what's happened to the fat cattle segment of this industry. We don't have any way of price discovery. We don't know if one's worth $1.10 or $1.20 or 90. It's hard to tell because we don't have a way of price discovery within the fat cattle segment of this industry.
Well, your best feeder cattle of the whole year are your late summer yearlings off grass. And those cattle are green. There's another term that people talk about all the time. And they said, some people say, well, you said there's some good black green cattle there. Well, what's that mean? Well, green cattle mean cattle that have been on forage. They haven't been supplementally fed. And a lot of people will say that their cattle are green when they have been getting, 1 to 2 pounds or, percentage of their weight per day. And that's still pretty green, but it kind of helps them along a little bit, especially on the fescue. Get some of the stronger grass, your short grasses in places it's got more power to it. And so you don't need to supplementally feed as much. But, we see those yearling cattle. They've got a little more age to them, and they've had that cheap gain on grass. And even though they may have some flesh to them, and depending on their delivery, might have some fill to them, they've still got compensatory gain because they have never had a taste of that grain. Or, they might have been creep fed as a calf, but they haven't had that grain, and it really tastes good to them. And, it's one thing my dad told me a long time ago. He said, never buy anything. We're always talking about cattle. Never buy anything that you don't plan to give a better home to than what they've already had.
Well, and it'll look different with different people. But you take I buy a lot of cattle, and it don't really matter to me what size they are, because, that's just what I do. But, we'll background, 75 or 80,000 cattle a year. And, we'll buy one that weighs 200 pounds, or we'll buy one that weighs 900 pounds. We buy a lot of 700 to 800 pound bulls and cut those bulls and make yearlings out of them. Those cattle are kind of short-term cattle. We'll keep those cattle 60, 75 days and then remarket them, But, it's in this business, it's all about people sometimes don't do a very good job with a lot of their cattle. They don't cut them, they don't vaccinate them, And I love them people, and a lot of people don't have no way to do that. But that's what makes up this industry. So we take those cattle home, and we'll get all their viral shots in them and their pneumonia shots in them, and get them wormed and cut the bulls and implant them and ear tag them and keep them around there for 2 weeks or 45 days, get them healthy. Then we'll generally go to grass with them, and we'll keep those cattle around, basically most all of them, till they weigh from 750 to 900 pounds, just depending on the time of year it is and how much grass we got, how much forage we got, how much feed we got on hand, how the market's reacting. There's lots and lots of different ways to do that. But I think the one thing that we all miss within this whole thing is it's all about money when it comes right down to the end. In the environment we're in today, you can buy a 500-pound steer for $750, and you can borrow money for 4%. So, in a year's time, you got $30 a head in money, interest on your money. But the thing about it is if you do your risk management, a lot of those banks will loan you the money. You just got to put up 20% of your own money. So you take a 750-pound steer and you put $150 of your actual money in him, and if you can run him around there and gain him for 65 or 70 cents, it's just leveraging your money. So you might make $150 on him in 6 months. So if you make 150 with 150 of your own money invested, that's 100% return every 6 months. Now, that's not always true because in the environment we've been over the last couple of years, it's been a little tough to do that. But that's the way you make money. It don't matter if you got $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, or 10 million, or 100 million. It's about leveraging what money you have of your own to make the most with it. And in the environment we are today, with the interest rates the way they are, there is some money to be made in the way to leverage your money, because interest is cheap. It's the cheapest input cost I have or anybody else has in this day and time.
Well, obviously there's more cattle in certain parts of our trade territory than there are in others, and so we have, our trade territory is basically all of Missouri, but we get 100 to 150 miles out in all the surrounding states as well. So and there's different practices in the Flint Hills. You got a lot of stocker operators, and there's not as many cow-calf ranches, but there are some. Down here in southwest Missouri is where the bulk of the cow-calf, I mean, if you take the total numbers in the state of Missouri, the bulk of the cattle are down in this part of the world. But we've got producers in southern Iowa and northwest Illinois and in Kentucky and Arkansas and places like that too. So there's cows about everywhere. But you're right, the concentration is down here in this part of the state.
Well, I think it's all about reputation of your cattle, and the thing about it is you get those cattle healthy, and no matter what you think or don't think, your cattle have a reputation. Just like the sale we're having here today, we got 6,500 cattle. That's all value-added cattle. It's on some type of a wean back program, had 2 rounds of live virus shots, been wormed, vaccinated. They got good genetics, and year after year after year, I've been in this business since I was 17 years old. So year after year after year, I sold the same cattle for the same people. They create a reputation. And believe me, a bad one goes way further than a good one does. Because if your cattle don't perform and they don't stay healthy in the feed yard or in the background that I sent them to, next year he's going to say, hey, I bought these calves out of your value-added sale, and I didn't get along with them. That bad reputation is a big, big deal. A good one is great because they'll buy them every year. A bad one, you're in trouble.
Okay, they have to be under your control when they're weaned. You have to either own or control the cows. So it's a source verified program that they have to be attributed to the ranch of origin. Now that doesn't mean that we can't use outside locations, but they have to be under your control. They're not purchased as pairs or purchased as weaned calves. That's a different level of the program. For Health Track, they have to be ranch of origin cattle. They have to be weaned for a minimum of 45 days. They have to have 2 complete rounds of vaccinations, which would include the 4- and 5-way virals. One of those rounds has to be modified live. They have to have 2 black legs. They can use 1 Pasturella shot because that's how the label works on Pasturella. They have to be dehorned, castrated, and healed from the dehorning. They have to be treated for internal and external parasites. And then they have to be, for the first 14 days at post-weaning, they have to be on, we have 3 products, nutrition products that they can choose in that mix. They have to be on those during that 14-day period. And again, that has to do with maximizing the immune process. And after that, they just work with MFA to figure out, okay, what kind of gain do you want to see out of these cattle, and here's your forage type. And so this is a supplemental process that will get you that level of gain. And we can go that way. We document all of that. One of our field reps has to literally, in most cases, our field reps are there for one of the working procedures. They don't have to be, but it's up to them to verify and audit the records to make sure it gets done.
Well, if you're sitting here with me and all of us here right now, there's 4,500 cattle outside that door right there. You're any balling? Maybe 1 or 2 balling, but it's not balling because they're not weaned. So you see all these cattle are weaned. We can buy them all. They all been treated pretty much the same way health-wise. You put loads of cattle together and send them to your customers, and when they unload them, they know how to eat. They know how to drink out of a water tank. They all been handled the same way vaccination-wise, and you can kind of feel like you're going to get along with them, and it's a general rule. But there's instances you don't. But you got a way better chance than you do any other time. And when we start selling these cattle here and you get a good idea, just group after group after group of weaned calves that'll all be similar in type and kind. It'll be up and down from variations from genetics, but as a whole, they're all been handled the same way health-wise, which is very, very important.
No, we've had some great relationships with some cattle feeders out there. It's You know, one of the problems that you have in this part of the world is the herd size is so small that the guy brings, you know, the average herd size in Missouri is 35 head, for example. So a guy brings, the average herd size in Health Track's been about 65 head. So you bring 50 calves here, they're half steers and half heifers, and then there's probably 2 drafts in each one. So it's very normal for there to be a 300 head pen in a feed yard in Greeley, Colorado that has 10 Health Track calves in it. So it's kind of hard to get that kind of attention made to those. But we have had relationships with feeders in the past that have, over like the course of a year, ended up with several thousand Health Track cattle, and they can keep track of. We had one individual when I first, kind of the first few years I was here, that was buying 15 to 20,000 head of cattle, of Health Track cattle a year. He was seeking them, and he said that it reduced his pulls by 50% and his death loss by about 75%. So that's the kind of feedback that you want to get. And new technology is going to make it possible to tie a lot of this data back together. We're getting carcass data back now because calves have EID tags in them, or because even now we're using some ultra high frequency tags. There's quite a few feed yards that are using that ultra high frequency technology because they don't have to change anything they do. It works at the speed of commerce. It works in their normal cattle handling procedures because they can read whole groups of cattle at once instead of single filing them on the low frequency tag. So here we're going to see a lot of changes in the next few years just based on the access to technology.
Well, you know, they're going to bring it to the top of the market. They're that type of cattle. You know, they're good genetics. They're you know, they got a good health program, and you know, no matter how they're bred genetically, if he's dead, it don't really make a whole lot of difference. You know, so you know, we're going to sell some cattle here today that's you know, not as good a cattle. They're going to bring a really good price because you know they're going to buy them because of health. They've all got a value, but you know, the way to add value is keep them healthy, because that's the number one biggest risk we have within this industry is death loss. Well, I think it's in the environment we're in today, it's pretty hard to tell what's going to happen. You know, we've been through a lot of things over the last year. We went through the Hokum fire when we don't have enough packers in this business, and you know, we need to do something about that and get some type of price discovery so that we can figure out a rule book to go by. And you know, I've told a lot of people this, you know, give me the rule book. I'll play any game you want to play, but I need the rule book. Well, the rule book's kind of become out the window here over the last year because we've had so many changes and so many obstacles in the way that's came along that's created all kinds of turmoil within this market, whether it be the Hokum fire in Kansas, whether it be the coronavirus. You know, the rule book's out the window. So from a prediction of what's going to happen in this market over the next 6-8 months, I can tell you this from today: the market is better today than I actually would anticipate it to be, that the shape that this industry in, especially at the feedlot level and the packer level, because we got 1 million cattle piled up that we need to kill. Our carcass weights are big. Actually, this feeder cattle and calf market is pretty dang good compared to the rest of it. And you know, in this business, you know, we're eternal optimists. We always think it's going to be better down the road, especially at the backgrounder and the feedlot level. We're just eternal bulls, and we're just that kind of people. We're gamblers. So what's going to happen, I couldn't really tell you because the rule book's out the window from all of the past years I've been around here. We are currently working with a series of companies out there right now that are all participating in developing a blockchain network. And the beauty of the blockchain network is that if you identify animals with an RFID tag, and the reason you have to do that is because it's unique. By definition, they are ISO compliant, which means they are a unique 15-digit number. That number doesn't exist anywhere else on the planet. So if you build a database, and in the case of blockchain, it's a distributed database. It's not housed in one central location. You just agree, if you're going to participate in this chain, this blockchain, that you agree to put your data points that have value, and everybody puts their data points that have value in here. And if you're a participant, then anytime that tag number gets dinged, then data is shared. And that's the concept. And so, and the really best part about blockchain is all that happens automatically. There's APIs and FTPs. Don't ask me what those mean. I'm just telling you that that's how you move data from one database into a distributed database system. But the coolest part about it is that now with blockchain, we literally have the ability
for a guy to bring one animal into Joplin Stockyards that has that ID capability, and then 200 some odd days later, or whatever, if that animal has carcass data collected on it and one of the participants of the blockchain is the feeder or the guy that gets that carcass data, that producer can get notified and get that feedback from his animals. So we've not been able to do that without something like blockchain, where you have willing participants working in that system. And it's not mandatory traceability. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with assigning value data points to a specific tag number. You know, the days of anonymity and unknown origin on products are, in my opinion, are going away pretty fast. These younger consumers are wanting to know where their food came from, how it was handled, you know, what products it was given. You know, there's a tremendous amount of interest from food service and even retail on branded programs that are able to build a supply chain that tracks all of those things, from anything from animal care and welfare to antibiotics and hormones. And it doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with the science behind that. There are people willing to pay for that knowledge. And as this technology improves, it's going to be important that you are in a process where you can participate in that without it costing too much. And then once you do that, then what you're basically telling the rest of the world is, I'm recording what I'm doing to these animals, not what I'm not doing to these animals. So if I'm responsible for and am trusted to record that I do these things, take these steps, then it opens the door for me to market those animals into supply chain systems that demand that kind of record keeping.
One thing about this business, you know, and you know, I'm not alone. You know, the cattle business has been the biggest romance in my life, my entire lifetime. You know, I love the people, I love cattle. You know, I like the livestock market business. You know, that's just me. You know, there's no better lifestyle than the cattle business, and there never has been, and in my opinion, never will be. You know, it's if you got to have the passion for it, because most of my life the cattle business has been a struggle. You know, there's a few years that's been really good, but most of the time it's grinded out. You know, it's just life and the way it works. But what a lifestyle, and what a way to live your life and raise your family and your kids, and to live the rural lifestyle. There's nothing better. So, you know, are you going to get rich and famous? Probably not, but you're going to have a good life, and you know, you're going to just struggle along, and it's a happy, glorious life, in my opinion.